You ever noticed, like, when it comes to us religious folks, we'll just throw us in that category, there's language that we like to use, okay? There's language we love to use, and it can go one of two ways. One of the things that we can do is we like our big words. Anybody like to use big words? You know, we like to use those big words. Why? Because they make us look, well, let me say this. Pastors love to use these big words. Why? Because number one, we need to convince you that we did go to school. We went to, we got master's degrees or whatever, and we want you to believe that we're smart, whether we are or not. So we throw out some big words, and one website I was looking at this week, they actually called them $10 words, And so here are some $10 words we love to use, words like sanctification. Is that one that comes up in your normal everyday conversation? Yeah, I'm sure it does. Justification, propitiation, ecclesiology. You guys are sitting there like, what in the world are all these words? I've got definitions, but you don't care, Parousia, anybody know what that is? Second coming of Jesus. That's what that one's about. Yep. Credo baptism. Anybody know? It's baptism, correct. Credo is the belief part. So that's what we as Baptists do. We baptize those that profess faith in Jesus as opposed to the churches that do infant baptism. That's why we're a little different here, And then, there's transubstantiation. That's a word that, the Catholics use. They talk about how communion and the Eucharist is taken. And these big words, right? Any of them coming up tomorrow in conversation at the office? You'll make it. Good. Write them down. This is one lane. This is one way we like to do things, big words. But then there's other words. We love words that fit on a poster. None of those fit on a poster, right? None of those go on the vinyl stickers on your wall. Now, if you have vinyl stickers on your wall, if you have, artwork like this, please do not be offended. We're going to poke fun a little bit, but this is the other lane because we love our words. Come to the Clark House, we've got them too, so it's okay. But we love... What's that? Well, see, you're jumping ahead of me, Tim. See, go to the next slide here, because this is also what we like right here. Family, faith, and friends. I don't want to, just give me a little head nod if you've got that on your wall at home. Let me see. No, okay, none of those. Fear. We also like it if it fits on a car decal too, right? Like if we can put it on a window on a car, there we go. Go to the next slide here. Here's some more, faith, hope, and love, and everything gives thanks. The only thing blessed is missing is a hashtag in front of it, so that would make it perfect. Go to the next one here. We got faith over fear. We've got something about mountains and be the light. And then I did like the cross that's made out of faith. That's kind of an interesting, cool, lot of artistic thing. Okay, I'll give that one a little pass. And then we got, I think, one more here. There we go. Faith, hope, and love. And I just loved the last one. If I could find the last one, I think I'd put that one on my car. Honk if you love Jesus. I'm about that. What's interesting about these words is that even though they may not be big words on the last one or with a lot of syllables and letters, I think sometimes it's easier to put them on the wall and see them than to really think about what do they actually mean. Do we really know what they mean? Do we really know how to define them? Did you guys notice on every slide there was one word that was repeated? Not love. Faith. There you go. Faith. Exactly. Faith. That term calls to mind many different things for many different people. When you hear, just for example, what comes to mind when you hear the word faith? Go ahead, somebody say hill. It's fine. Country fans? See, it took them a second. Hill, not heel. So I'm sorry, I'm from the South. That's how we say it. Faith Hill. Come on, she's a country superstar. Let's go. Come on. See how easily that rolled back into that for me? That's very quickly. It's there. It's just repressed, pushed way, way down. So what else do you think of when you hear the word faith? Unseen? Trust?
It's that one songbird that starts making noise before the sun comes up.
Say that again now?
It's that one bird that starts making
Oh, the one bird that makes the sound before the sun comes up. Okay. Very nice. You know it's coming. Belief. Yeah. Trust. Yep. All these things could be, it can have a lot of different meanings. Faith can even be a set of beliefs, a set of doctrines that we believe. We are of the, Baptist faith, the Methodist faith, the Presbyterian faith, the Catholic faith. That's what it can mean. It can also mean a specific religion too, like I was just saying. It can also mean trust. I mean, we're told when we use that word that we need to keep the faith and not lose faith. The great theologian George Michael told us you got to have faith, the faith. You got to have faith. No 80s children in here, obviously. It's fine. It's fine. Okay, I was just waiting. Where was my amens on that one, We do things in good faith, and we hope nobody does things to us or for us in bad faith. We use this word a lot. When it comes to religion, there's this commonly held view that in order to be here, to do this, in order to follow Jesus, that when it comes to faith, that we have to take a leap of faith. One of my favorite movies does a great example. Take a look. Okay, watching this right here, Matthew Becker has failed as a husband, evidently, because his wife, I could tell by her face, has never seen that clip before, ever. Let me see the hands. Who has not seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? Oh my goodness, there's a lot of hands in here. Wow, great movie. You've seen 2 clips from this in the last 4 to 6 weeks here at Ashworth, so there you go. Is that how it's supposed to be? Is that what's supposed to happen? That when you come to faith, that you just kind of put that leg out and just go, I hope something there to catch me. Often, that is what's thought about faith. It's a blind leap into the abyss of whatever, and we hope something's there to catch us. And with that comes this idea that you need to check your brain at the door, because nobody in their right mind would do something like that. So there's no logic, there's no reason. It is blind faith, and we are asking you to blindly follow Jesus. Does that sound right? I hope not. I hope not. Last week we started this new series. We're calling it Start Here, and we're hoping to clear away some of the religiosity that pops up when it gets down to following Jesus. And we want to just clear away some of the clutter and get back to the basics, kind of a Christianity 101 class. What is this about? What does it look like? And last week we started with the foundation because it's Jesus, and we saw that everything rises and falls on who Jesus is, who he claimed to be, and what he did as far as his life, death, and resurrection. And we saw that it didn't just end with what he said, that his earliest followers, those early disciples, they also believed what he said. They went around and told people. They were so convinced of what he did and what he said that they even had this early creed that they would say often and repeat over and over, Jesus is Lord. And we talked about how powerful that was and how in the face of culture and politics and everything that expression was. But everything starts and ends with Jesus, and we see that his life, his death, and his resurrection give validity to this claim. And the disciples believed it so much that they reoriented their entire lives around following him, up to and including giving their lives for him. Like many were martyred because of their testimony about who Jesus was and what he was done, what he had done. And we kind of closed with that question last week, who do you say Jesus is? It's an important question. We all have to come to that question at some point. But then we have to come to the next question is, what next? What do you do with that? I mean, do we say, okay, I believe Jesus is Lord and that is it? Or is there something else? Is there more? And that brings us to our topic today of faith. Growing up as a pastor's kid, I've shared before, I was in church the Sunday after I was born. I remember growing up, we had children's church. You guys know we dismiss our kids every Sunday after our worship time, after our music. And they're downstairs right now, and they get a lesson. They get to learn about the Bible. They're learning who Jesus is, and they're having fun and games. And occasionally we're doing things like Kids in the Kitchen. I think we've got Prayer in the Park coming up in a few weeks. We're trying to do everything we can to help these kids fall in love with Jesus. In fact, if you love kids and you love Jesus, you should consider volunteering and going to help sometime because it'd be great. Not in the notes, just I live with the children's director, so it's helpful. But growing up, we had children's church as well. Do you guys have children's church? Yeah. You know, we had our own space, and we actually had our own worship time and everything. We had music, and I remember Miss Margie was the piano player for our kids' time, and she was amazing. And I remember, you know, singing the songs and hearing the Bible stories. And I'll tell you, though, I know the Bible story stuck because I do know about David and Goliath, and I know about Peter walking on the water. I know about the Apostle Paul. But I couldn't tell you what anybody said. You know, what any of the guys that stood up and told us the Bible stories couldn't remember. But you know what I do remember? The music. I remember so many of the songs that we used to sing. And as I was putting this message together, one of those songs that happened, you know, when I was 7 or 8 years old, so just 20 years ago, why are you laughing? That's offensive right there. I remembered one of these songs. It just kind of popped in my head. And I had not heard this song in a really long time. But I thought I'd share it with you today. Take a listen. There you go. And we'd sing it again. And we'd get done, and just like kids do, we'd say, can we sing it again? And can we sing it again? What do you think? I don't remember the actions on that one. You know, growing up, we were Baptist. So we couldn't, that was frowned upon. We had song books with people that would turn pages. That's what our music experience was. Faith is just believing what God says He will do. That's the theology of the song. What do you think about that? Does that sound right? Partially. Yeah, partially. It's probably the place it needs to start. Unfortunately, I think for many people, it's the place that it ends, but it's not a full definition or understanding of faith, because I think there's more to it. When you jump into the Bible, even there, I think faith can be a little bit difficult to define because, you know, you think about what Jesus said about faith. He made statements like this, "O ye of little faith." He said that a few times. He said, hey, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, very, very tiny, you can say to this mountain, go and cast into the sea, and it'll do it. Whoa. So when it comes to faith, when we look there, it's hard to really sink our teeth into something. But in the book of Hebrews, in the New Testament, we do have a definition for faith. Now, I will tell you, it's not meant to be an exhaustive definition. It's not meant to be where we go, oh, this is it completely. No. But it does provide some insight. It's in the book of Hebrews. It's in chapter 11. And if you're unfamiliar with this part of the Bible, let me tell you, Hebrews 11 is known as the faith chapter of the Bible. Through the 40 verses, you will find a retelling of the story of the Jewish people. It goes all the way back to Cain and Abel. It talks about characters that you may not even have heard of. Like it mentions this guy named Enoch, who all we know about him is in Genesis chapter 5. It says this: Enoch walked faithfully with God, and then he was no more because God took him away. That's it. That's all we have in Genesis, and somehow this man makes it to Hebrews chapter 11 as well. We hear about Noah, we hear about Abraham and his descendants, we hear about Rahab, who's described as a prostitute. Now I got to tell you, just kind of stinks at some level that, okay, I had some things in my past, but we're just going to keep tying those to this poor woman the whole time. And then when you get to the end of this, towards the end of that, the writer of the book of Hebrews, and we really don't know who wrote this. The writer's kind of mysterious. We're not sure who it was. But the writer says this, and what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell you about. And then it just goes on and lists more and more names of people. And then at the very end it says this: these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. By faith, all these people, something's happening. So they're doing something, things are going on. And they're willing, they do it, they follow, they're doing what God wants them to do. And what's interesting is that it says, and they're commended for this faith, but none of them received the promise yet. What does all this mean? Well, what I want to do is go back a little bit. What is this faith that they had? What is it that's so commendable? And more importantly, how do we get that? what happens within us. And so if you go back to Hebrews 11 and you start in verses 1 and 2, here's what's written. It says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. Look at those words again. Faith is confidence in what we hope for, and it is assurance about what we do not see. Now, there's some interesting word choices here with confidence and assurance. And what's interesting is that, over the centuries, over the millennia, there's always a little bit of debate in trying to figure out how do we translate words from 2,000 years ago in a different culture to our culture today. And often I think we want simplicity and we think, oh, well, this word means this. That very rarely happens where there's a word for word equivalency. And so anytime we read the Bible, we understand there is a little bit of interpretation taking place in what we're reading. And Tim Mackey from the Bible Project, if you don't pay attention to the Bible Project, you should. They're amazing. Their videos are great. And I was listening to him this week talk about this passage in Hebrews. And he goes into a little bit of this passage right here and these two words specifically, and really challenges the idea that maybe these two words aren't the best words to convey what faith really is. And so he shares how confidence and assurance could also be translated as substance or reality and evidence. Now go ahead and go to the next slide because I put both words in there. Now let's read this the second way with the new words. Now faith is reality in what we hope for and evidence of what we do not see. Does that change the way we understand that a little bit? It really does. What Mackey does is he kind of brings out the fact that the first way that's translated, it's a state of mind. It's something that can be going on inside of you, a mental choice, a state of being, even to the place where you can say, well, it's the confidence, I hope, it's the assurance, yeah, but it's kind of, I hope this is true, I hope this is sure kind of thing. But the second translation, the other words, brings it more into an experience that you have, that puts you in touch with. You get a taste of reality, of the substance that you're hoping for. And I think that it's an important part of faith that we have to consider. Is the faith we are asked to have or show, is it a mental state that we're asked to kind of whip ourselves up into, to conjure up, to make us feel something that maybe we're not sure about? Sometimes I think that's where we go with faith. Fake it till you make it. That doesn't sound like faith, does it? And yet sometimes that's kind of what we assume or push onto people. Oh, you don't believe? Well, just keep believing. It'll happen. And Mackey says, no. We're not asked to step off the ledge like Indiana Jones, hoping there's something there to catch us. We aren't called to blind faith. There is something behind our faith. There are reasons that we believe, and nowhere do we ask you, check your brain at the door. Because that's not faith. As Tim Mackey says, that's just stupid. And I agree. When it comes to faith, we can engage our minds. We can use our brains to bring this to our understanding of faith. And even looking at what the writer of Hebrews says gives us more indication about this. Now, we're not going to read all 40 verses. I will tell you, if you haven't read Hebrews 11:4, put it on your list. Put it in your phone and say, okay, this week I'm going to read these 40 verses. It's a great read. It really is. But I just want to pick a few verses out of this passage to kind of help you understand maybe a little more about what we're trying to learn about faith. So if we jump to Hebrews chapter 11, we read about Sarah. Sarah was Abraham's wife. She's told at 90 years old that she's going to give birth to a son. Laughable, yes, and she actually laughs. She's got some questionable things in her life. She treats her handmaid very poorly once she gets pregnant by her husband and sends him off and all this. But even the mistakes don't disqualify her from mentioning here. Look at Hebrews 11, starting in verse 11. It says, and by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. What did Sarah do? She considered. The Hebrew word here for considered is the same one that can also be translated to think. What did Sarah do? She thought about God. She thought about his faithfulness. Put yourself in this position of Sarah. What would she think about? What might she consider to help her move in faith? Well, she could assume, could she assume, that God would be faithful? And I think she would say yes. Could she be 100% certain? Maybe not. That's faith. But it is reasonable for her to assume that God has been faithful before, and she can trust him to be faithful again. Isn't that amazing? I mean, isn't that how faith should work? We look back. We did that a little bit this morning. We see how God has moved. We understand who God is, and it gives us confidence, assurance to go forward, to believe that God would do that again. Not only that, but look at verse 17. We bring Abraham into this, and it says this, by faith Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac a sacrifice. That story is crazy. They do have a child, Abraham and Sarah, and God says to Abraham, I want you to sacrifice this child for me. Kind of a test of Abraham's faith to see if he's willing to give up that which he treasures most in order to serve God. It says he who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. What did Abraham do? He reasoned. What is that word? It's a different word than what's used for Sarah, but it can also mean to infer, to conclude, to think. It's kind of like the song we sing here sometimes. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. That is a song of faith. That is a song of testimony that says, I have experienced and I've understood and I've known what God has done before. It gives me the confidence. It's a reality for me to look forward in faith to know that God will do it again. Nobody is asking you, Jesus is not asking you for blind faith. There is a reason to believe. Why would anyone possibly believe in a man named Jesus who claimed to be the Son of God? Why would we believe that he died and that he rose from the dead? Do you know why? Because there were people that were there, that knew him, that experienced him, that saw him die, that put his body in a tomb, that came to a tomb that was empty, and on the following days interacted with a dead man that was back to life. And they went and they wrote about it and they told other people. I mean, even the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians tells us this. He says, Christ died for our sins according to the Scripture, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scripture, and that he appeared to Cephas, Peter, and then to the 12. And then after that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and lastly, he appeared to me as to one abnormally born. Why in the world would Paul write this? Most of whom were still living. Because he says, don't believe me? Yeah. You know who they are. You know where they live. Go knock on their door. Go ask them. They will tell you. They will tell you, I saw him. I touched him. I listened to him. It was Jesus. That's the evidence that exists. That's where faith begins. Faith is just believing. But it doesn't end with just believing. It begins with reason, with a mental activity. But there's more that has to come in order to faith to be faith. Going back to Hebrews chapter 11, when you read this chapter, you'll see a lot of this. I'm just going to pick one out again for Abraham. Verse 8 says this, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Over and over in that chapter, we see a list of people who are commended not only because they believed something, but because they also did something. As one person I heard this week put it, faith isn't faith unless you do something about it. That's the difference. And this is where things get tricky for us for a couple of reasons. First, because it may seem again like we're calling for that leap of faith, a leap into, stepping off the ledge. Do you guys know where that idea comes from? We've talked about this a few years ago. It's a concept that comes from the writings of Kierkegaard. He kind of talks about this leap of faith, but a leap of faith isn't what he was talking about at all. In fact, he talks about a leap to faith. And think about the difference between a leap of faith and a leap to faith. Pastor and author Brian Zahn, in his book, When Everything's on Fire, Faith Forged from the Ashes, he writes this. He's talking about Kierkegaard's ideas here, and he says, faith is not a feeling, but faith is also not empirical proof. Faith is action based on that which is revealed to the heart. Make a decision and take what Kierkegaard calls a leap into faith. There's a guy named Charles Moore. He's a scholar on Kierkegaard, and he writes this. He says, faith, therefore, requires a leap. It is not a matter of galvanizing the will to believe something there's no evidence for, but a leap of commitment. God is known by way of a passionate, undivided commitment. Do you see the difference? Do you understand? We see the evidence, we kind of rationalize it, we understand, but there's always going to be a place that the evidence can't get you 100% there. There's going to be a moment where you have to say, am I willing to take that leap into faith? Still not the blind leap, but still something is going to need to compel us to get there. There's a second challenge with this idea of faith and obedience. And it's simply this. We can get to the assumption that is our faith or our obedience that produces the faith, and that's not the case either. It's not our obedience that makes faith happen. What we have to do is we have to step back and we have to look at the source and the origin of our faith. Where does faith even come from? Even if we have so little faith that we can barely make it out, you might even just be seeking and wondering, asking questions about faith, asking questions about Jesus. I would look at that and say, that's faith. That's faith. You see, what we have to understand is we don't muster up faith. We don't really create faith. Our faith acknowledges that we don't do this on our own. We didn't bring it into ourselves. The reason we even think about it at all is because God decided to create us in His image. And we've said it before, He created us with a God-shaped hole that only He can satisfy because He has chosen to reveal Himself to us. I mean, think about that. Why do we think there is a God as opposed to no God? It is because God took the initiative. He was always the initiator that said, I will reveal myself to my creation. We know who He is because He took the first steps and He says, I want to be known. His divine revelation is the seed of faith that has been planted within us. And when we take that leap into faith, it moves us. It motivates us. We don't act in order to get faith. We act because of our faith. And that's critical to understand. James, the brother of Jesus, wrote this. We have it in the New Testament in the book of James. He says, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Faith by itself, it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. Look at this next verse. You believe there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that, and they're smart enough to quake, shudder. You foolish person, do you want evidence that your faith without deeds is useless? Look at this. We're going to see some names we've just talked about. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. Can you tell, even just from here, that the writer of Hebrews and the writer of James, they're looking off the same page here. They're writing the same story. They're in agreement in what is being said, especially when it comes to faith and works. Faith isn't about earning anything. Faith isn't about proving yourself. It's actually the opposite. It means giving up on the idea that you can do anything to earn God's favor and choosing instead to trust completely in what Jesus has done for you. Can I say that again? Faith isn't about earning. Faith isn't about proving anything. It's the opposite. It's giving up on the idea that you can earn God's favor and choosing instead to trust completely in what Jesus has done for you. And the works you do, the works I do, they spring from faith and provide evidence of faith. See, faith is not a mental assent. Faith is not, well, I have the right beliefs. Faith is not just believing. Faith is active and alive. And the more we live in faith, the stronger our faith can become. Faith is like a muscle. If we don't ever exercise it, it just is there. But the more we exercise that faith, the stronger that faith can become. And as Amy likes to remind me, there's a guy by the name of John Wimber. He started the Vineyard movement. He loved to say this: faith is spelled R-I-S-K. That's critical to understanding. And one final thought on faith. Oh man, our time's running short. Hebrews 11:6. You read through this when you're in that chapter. The writer says this: and without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. While our faith may not be blind, it will move us to see things that may not be, to live in a greater reality than the world we actually see before us. Faith calls us to live beyond what we can only see, because we're not called to perpetuate the world as it is. We're not called to perpetuate the world with all its brokenness and injustice. We're not called to enjoy the spoils of systems that benefit us while other people suffer. Faith calls us to live in light of a different reality, and faith empowers us to do what we think might be impossible. And how do we do this? We remember. We look backwards to remember what God has done, so that when we look forward, we do so seeing what God can do, and it moves us forward in hope. New Testament scholar Amy Peeler writes this about Hebrews 11. She says, through this beautiful and powerful chapter, the author has cast a vision of faith. Faith looks back to what God has done and finds the mighty God trustworthy. Faith looks forward to what God has promised to do: defeat the power of death, gather all people who trust in the living Son in resurrected bodies to live forever in the heavenly city, which is the center of renewal for the good creation. This is the faith that unites humanity through all generations. This is the faith that allows endurance and righteous action through whatever difficulties any members of this family may face. We are called to see what is not, to help bring about what is not. That is another aspect of faith that we live. Why are we raising money for a church building in India? Because we see through eyes of faith a building centered in a community where villagers from all around come together on Sunday to worship God. Does that exist right now? No. But can it? Yes. And how do we see it? Through faith. Are we living as faith people? Are we living as faith people, or are we living just like everybody else, just resigning ourselves to the way the world is? Jesus didn't die for us to live the way things are. Jesus died to invite us into the kingdom of God, to say, you see the brokenness? Me too. Let's do something about it. Let's give ourselves to this. Let's throw ourselves all in. Is it scary? Absolutely. Is it worth it? You better believe it. To look at a God and say, you've been faithful before, you will be faithful again. God, do it again. And yes, sometimes it may feel like Indiana Jones taking that foot straight out and falling off that cliff. But when we've got God, we know that the object of our faith is greater than any obstacle we will ever come against. And did you see what Hebrews 6 said was the reward for those who live in faith? It's not some beautiful crown. It's not a new house or new car. It's better. The reward for those who earnestly seek Him is God Himself, to be with Him. And when we think about the God we're talking about, the God I described last week as this loving, compassionate, caring Father who didn't wait for us to seek Him, but came looking for us. And when we turn toward Him, we find that God running toward us. And in Him, we find peace and contentment. We find shalom. We find wholeness and healing. And we find love that is indescribable. Is there any greater reward than that? Why is this topic so important? Because I believe we live in a time where people are desperately searching for something to believe in. Meditation, energy, crystals, astrology, manifestation, fitness, clean eating, ourselves. We want something to believe in. We all desire to have faith in something. We need to ask ourselves, what do I have faith in? Who am I trusting? And more importantly than that, is the object of my faith worthy of my faith? Does it deserve me putting my trust in it? Or is it just hopeless resignation that says I need something and I'm willing to try anything? And while we still may have to admit the mysterious nature of faith, it does exist. It doesn't matter if you have a little faith or an imperfect faith. The question is, are you willing to take a step of faith? To move beyond the thought of belief to actually doing something about it. As one author put it this week, you'll never know if Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life by sitting all alone upstairs in your head thinking about it. You have to act on it. And I just want to challenge you this morning, for those of you here, is it time to do something about it? Let's pray.